Well, hello there. Welcome to this Fantomas Friends. I have Chet and Patrick here, and Chet is our special guest today, which will be the driver of our session. Chet, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm Chet Husk, and I've been around the ecosystem a little bit. I'm that Barenfell guy on GitHub, and I'm at Chet Husk on the Foundation Slack and on Twitter. I do mostly core infrastructure tooling, and I help maintain Iodide.
That's a very modest introduction. Chet is the real hero when it comes to the FSC package, so big kudos for that. Patrick, why don't you give a little bit of background on yourself as well, maybe?
Oh, right. I suppose co-host, I kind of have to then. Sure. So I have been working at G Research for the last 2.5 years-ish. So we're a quant finance company that uses F#. We adopted F# many years ago. So we use it in the finance space. I'm particularly interested in we've recently started doing a bit more sort of open source outreach kind of stuff, and I'm interested in hanging on to that and seeing what we're doing and getting a bit involved.
All right, cool. So, Chet, maybe let's just get started. Dive right in. We had something in mind for this session, so if you could share the screen, maybe start with the issue.
Yeah, that sounds fine. I'm going to go ahead and share my whole screen. For those of you watching along, I'm going to try and make sure and pop up the zoom level a little bit. So I guess if you're watching along and something is not clear, please shout out in chat, and I can do what I can to make that better. But there was a discussion that happened in the Foundation Slack last week, I believe, where a user was trying out Fantomas and found that it was reverting their new line settings that they had set in their editor config file. And I feel like Fantomas would benefit from being able to understand that setting and apply it to the code it's formatting, because that's kind of the point of the editor config file. And apparently Florian agrees, which is why he approved the issue.
Yeah, it's a very important thing. A lot of issues sort of get created, and I sort of need to be the judge in all of this. The thing is that Fantomas sort of adopted editor config, but not all default settings in one go. It now just uses the new line of the environment it's currently in. So on Linux it will use just a new line. On Windows return carries new line. And there's no way of changing that, and that's something we can look into today.
Cool. I guess we can go a little bit deeper into what the setting we're interested in is and what its allowed values are as sort of some background.
Mm-hmm.
So I have the page for editor config itself up here. If you're not familiar with what editor config is, it's a dot file. It's dot editor config that lives in the root or a subdirectory of a repository, and it applies or it provides some formatting settings to tools that know how to read that file. And tools are able to read these files, and these files sort of inherit in a sort of nesting doll model. And all that they do is provide a series of properties that the various tools have to interpret when they do their jobs. The property that we're interested in adding today is called end of line, and it has 3 valid values: LF, CR, or CRLF. And a tool that respects this should treat new lines as the setting set here in any sort of source code formatting or insertion or editing task that it does. And that's the entire spec. How is that a decent summary of the issue and sort of where we are today?
Yep, that's a very good summary there. I think the first thing we can do is sort of create a failing unit test in what we expect in end-to-end behavior and sort of take it from there, I guess.
Sure. So what I've got on my terminal over here, and I'll make this slightly bigger as well, is I've cloned down the Fantomas repository. And a second ago I was on a different branch, but no, that's not it either. Configurable end of line. We'll do that. So I had just done a build using the fake script in here to make sure that I was in a known good state before we started. So we are in a known good state, so we can start there. So Fantomas has some tests here, and one thing that would be helpful for me, Florian, is if you knew where there were tests specifically around like editor config.
Yeah, so
the format config itself, maybe?
Yeah, we have 2 test files for that. So one is just the parsing of the editor config. So if you look into Fantomas.test somewhere, it has a format config editor configuration file tests.
Yep, got it.
Quite the name. So that's a starting point.
Perfect. All right, so let's look at what some of these tests do. So there is a configuration file structure.
Yeah, I think you maybe could scroll down just a bit. There are a couple of better tests. And this is just the content of an editor config, read the configuration value, and then expect that our property is filled in.
Gotcha. Okay, perfect. That is very, very simple to start. So we'll just add a new one. And it looks like you all prefer sort of Python-style snake case for the test names here, not backticked.
Yeah, it is backticked, actually. So feel free to use backticks. I think that the test above is just the bland name of the configuration, and could have used a better name, I guess, or a more friendly name.
This was maybe a bad idea, and we're going to see why in a second.
Is it hanging?
Ionide, yeah.
Oh.
Ionide, and specifically, I think the regexes that we have for sort of quick tokenization of syntax highlighting does not like double backtick symbols, and it will hang like this. This is actually Matthias Brandewiner's pet issue that he pokes me about periodically. So it's dead at this point. I'm going to have to quit VS Code.
Oh.
And come back in.
And are you on a stable version of Ionide?
Yes. This is a known issue that we have documented on the repo. The workaround is don't use backticks, or rather, don't edit backticks, which is not exactly a great workaround, but there we are. So this is a solvable problem in Ionide because we no longer necessarily need to use these regexes for tokenization anymore. There's a better structure that's available to us that lets us use the compiler services themselves for highlighting.
Okay.
So, in the meantime, we know where it's from. We're testing this. So this is just going to be end of line. Actually, I'm going to parameterize this. I'm going to get slightly... I won't. We'll start with this, but I would like to parameterize this across the 3 values eventually, just to verify we can read all of them. All right, so now what I would like to be able to do is to say something like that. But we can't because this doesn't exist. So now we should go make it exist.
Format config.
Yep. All right. So we could go with sort of what is your opinion on this? We have a discrete set of acceptable values here, which we could very simply model as a string. Like that would be the easiest thing to do. But we also have modeling capabilities in terms of DUs and F#. So do you have a preference for what a setting like this should be in Fantomas?
I think a discriminated union makes a lot of sense. But could you add the setting, the last one? So after disable Elvish syntax?
Yes.
Because, well, strict mode is a bit of a, yeah, it's a different story, but I just don't want any settings after strict mode. Strict mode shouldn't be a setting in a certain way, I guess.
Fair enough.
So it's, yeah, it's a thing.
And I'm not caring at all about formatting right here, and I don't have to because Fantomas has a built-in fake target to do its own formatting.
Yes.
So I'm just going to write code and then let Fantomas fix things up for me, which is lovely.
Indeed.
So the next question is, what should a reasonable default be for this?
I think the best way is to have it in a non-breaking way and pick the environment new line. Sort of
To do a match on that.
Yeah, translate that one to.
You know what? Let's do this.
Alternative approach you might not want to follow is to keep it optional in the config and then pass it somewhere later. But I mean, this looks absolutely fine to me.
Now, I mean, this does have the. Yeah, I mean, we're going to have an inexhaustive pattern match problem on this, but.
I think CR and LF are the wrong way around there.
Yep,
yeah,
you're exactly right. Every time I do this, I make that mistake. Yep. Okay, so that should be fine. And then I don't particularly like this, and it would be nice if this wasn't just a bare string, but this is the world we live in.
That's what we have, indeed.
Okay, so that's just iodide taking a sec. So now we have that config in there, and so now this, if we have the, yep, we do have the module opened, so this should be fine now. So what I can do is go run this test. For those of you who don't know, you can run specific tests via the command line in .NET Test with the filter syntax. Florian actually has this documented in the contributing documentation for this repo as part of how you can debug tests in Ionide.
Yeah, this little trick you can do to get the debugging working when you're running in your command line.
Oh, because I typoed that. That's why everything is sad. I guess I should ask, is my are my text settings fine for everyone?
Maybe
is the size fine on the screen?
Maybe just increase just a little bit more.
Sure thing.
Yeah, I think that's going to be better.
Perfect. And I'll increase on the terminal as well. All right, so this will take a second, but then our single test will run. Is it worth demoing the, I guess we'll get into debugging tests later, probably.
Most likely.
Looks like I don't know how to write a test.
Yeah, you need to end with units, and you went with a rule, I guess. So that's why we sort of have the double equal signs.
I see.
It's a custom operator, actually, and it does an assert call to end unit, I think.
Yep. that should do it. This is like the one time when, what are they called? Ligatures can mess you up. All right. So, you know what? This is a bad example.
Yeah, because you're on Linux, so that's the
Yep.
default.
So we should have something here that says,
I guess we could parameterize the whole test by LF, CRLF, and CR.
yeah, I mean, that would fail, or that would give us at least 2 failures, right? But in current state, it would give us 1 success always, whatever your current environment one happened to be, I think. So let's do this. Let's just start here. I feel like we might have to parameterize it 2 ways, one on the 3 options and one on the different operating system styles, so that we can make sure that the default that's set is always not the one you're expecting or something like that. But if we do this, it should definitely fail. Well, for a couple of reasons. There. At least on my system, because I'm running on a MacBook right now. All right. We got failures. That's great. So this is my intuition where we're going to want to go next, and that's reading the configuration.
Yep.
I've been in this code a little bit before, so I have a good idea where we're going to need to go, but we're going to have some editor config settings properties, and so we're going to need to parse them as fields, and there's a little bit of reflection magic here that is handling some of this for us. So we're getting the configuration value fields from our default structure. We are mapping them to a name in the editor config, and then we are trying to parse the correct values out. And there's a helper here for complex types, and I think we'll have to implement sort of the same pattern for this new DU that we. So if we go look at how this was done before, well, let me scaffold some things out. So if we go look at this, this is literally just string mapping. So let's implement the same pattern. And I've got inconsistent naming that I see here. I've got end of line style, but I'm like thinking of it as end of line type. So just note, I might want to make that more consistent with the rest of the code base at some point. Stylistically, I see we're doing explicit matches on things. Is that a thing that you all would like to stick with?
There's no real preference. I'm not super picky on that, so.
As opposed to what? Sorry, as opposed to, for example, like function and then a
Yeah.
match without naming the argument.
Yeah, the function lambda.
I think in this case it could be okay. It's a pretty simple case, but if you're ever going to debug the codes, then I would go with a match actually.
I personally prefer an explicit match for what it's worth.
Love it. Sometimes when I'm asking about things like this, I'm absolutely going to stay with the style of the code as it currently is. Just trying to ask these questions so that folks that come along get a sense for the benefits and like the actual decision-making process that goes into it.
Cool. For what it's worth, I personally like if we've got a small DU case like LF, like something with a really short name, I prefer to make the whole type required qualified access, just so that it's like you don't end up with these 2-letter DUs floating around in all of the namespaces. But again, I don't really know what the general view is on that.
I find myself more and more coming around to that line of thought. It's you just end up littering your code base so much without it. Especially because we do tend to make lots of types. Like that's kind of a thing that we are known for. Lots of lightweight, cheap types.
Do we want to lowercase the incoming string automatically?
That is probably an excellent idea. We'll note that we don't do it here, which is just a thing to think about. Part of the reason I went with just the lowercase sort of exact matches was because it's part of the spec that only these 3 values are.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, remove the 2 lower then. It's has to be right.
All right, so we have our mappers, and so now we should be able to come back to the.
Could we later on refactor the from environment and reuse of config string? No, never mind.
No,
Never mind.
I don't think so.
I think they're conceptually a bit different.
Yeah.
Different enough to have their own distinct things.
Yeah, now we will essentially be doing a reversal of this at some point, a reversal of this function. When we use this to do the sort of source code wise find and replace. So there might be a way to do that in a nicer way. One thing I actually learned about recently from the Haskell side of things is if you have a mapping function from this sort of domain to range like we have here, there's a pattern that they have that you can wrap a function like that in a function that tracks the inputs and outputs and generates the reversing function for you automatically, which would be handy, I think. Not saying go full Haskell all the time, but I mean, it's a very clear pattern here, for example.
I've rolled my own with that several times without knowing there was a pattern for it.
All right, so where were we? We were here. Perfect. So we've delegated to this function that we just made to make an active pattern. So now we can come in here and say true end of line type. Actually, this is where the nomenclature was getting jumbled. So we will keep those all the same right now. And actually what I'm seeing is that we're boxing on this right here. So I need to do that here.
Because of the reflection.
Yeah.
Also,
Ooh, it's a bit sad that we return an obj, though, isn't it? Do we have to box it here?
I think we do it for the active pattern. So,
Yeah, I mean you could box it at this point, I think, if you wanted to. Because it's just this map that has to end up returning a bool, you know? But well, that seems like scope creep to me, personally. All right, so we have fetched out values.
Could you
the one
go again to Fantomas, the 2 editor config name?
Yeah, so this is going to prefix it with F# because it's not one of our supported properties.
Yeah,
and since this is one of the sort of canonical or cross-language properties, then we need to do this. And this will make it so that when we try and discover the matching editor config property name for one of our record fields, we will use the name as written and not prepend F# to it. Cool. So I think that's all we have to do to actually make this test pass.
In the supported things, we've called it end of line, and it actually should be end of line in the code that we just
Thank you
edited.
very much. And I just did it again. The reason why is because I was too quick on the Command S for the save. That's why.
Lovely.
All right. So we should have a passing test at this point. Yeah, cool. I haven't used NUnit for parameterized data in a while, so I had to go relook that up.
All right, cool.
Ah, boy, we can't do that because it's not a const, right?
No, you can use test case data if you want to reflectively look up into a
and then make a matching.
Yeah, an array with the right string name. Or you can just give it an int and then match as soon as you enter the function on what the int was.
All right.
I don't know of a better way to do it than this.
Be right back, making a reflection wrapper to generate these for us.
And then I think you need to list.map test case data over the end of line settings. I can never remember how to do this, though. I have to say, I always have to look it up.
So what I was thinking was that I believe there's also a test case source that you can do. Well, if we can't do name of yet in this repo yet,
you can just bump up the version while you're here, right?
Check my other PR for that. So I think this might be a way to do what we want, and I can do this as and we can either create a toString for this, but I think I'd actually prefer something like this, to where it's a property of the DU value itself, because I dislike overloading the toString of a type in this way. This we can give like a unique name to, and have it be something that has meaning in our domain. This should actually be style, I think. Yeah. All right.
Is it config style? Is it end of line style?
Nope, it's not. That's why it worked before. Silly Chet. So to make this work now, I need to go to Fantomas or format config and implement this, like the opposite of this from environment method, essentially, for it. What is a good name for this? Something like this.
The first thing that popped into my mind was like render or something, but I don't really have a strong view.
This is okay, I think.
To do, bike shed. So if we do this, and then we say then this should round trip now.
It is also wonderful to see how you're not annoyed by the red squigglies at all.
I'm a little annoyed, but
There's a bit of acceptance in it, isn't it? Because you know how this stuff works, right?
yeah, it has something to do with propagation of Project A getting compiled, not notifying Project B that there are new type check results. There's something there that isn't quite right, because Fantomas test has a project reference on phantoms.core, right? However, since we're building over here and we have some dead time, we can reload over here. Aha. All right, so what is our error here? We've got
326.
Oh, this EOL, or this did not parse correctly.
Oh, the EOL.newLine to string, I think might have to go on a new line. And indented maybe once or twice.
Oh, that is interesting.
It needs to be indented further than the sprintf thing, so or
Yeah.
at least at the same line, or at least at the same column.
Yeah.
Oof.
Wow, that's
that was
That only a mother could love.
that was nasty to
All right.
solve. But, yeah.
So is that a parser issue?
I think not, but you're not getting AST if you don't do it. Why not?
I always write these, by the way, with the sprintf on a new line, and then all arguments to the sprintf indented one space further.
Yeah.
So something like
That's what Fantomas is going to do, by the way. So
something like this.
Not one space, sorry, one tab. So I usually put the string on a new line as well, and then the end of.
Oh no.
Is something.
So I guess either we called the option.default value in read configuration, or something is wrong in try read configuration. I don't yet know which of those is true.
So, well, now's the perfect time to investigate debugging. We could do printf stuff here, but honestly, it's just as easy to do this. So if you add this environment variable, so actually stepping back a second, when .NET Test runs your tests, it does two things. It starts the .NET Test runner, and then it runs your tests in a separate process. And you can actually see that happening here. If you add this environment variable, you can see the logs of the test runner and how it has spawned another process and immediately paused it. So because of that, you get this process ID right here. You can run the attach configuration here and attach to your process. And now we are on that process and we can resume processing. And you can see the debugger going nuts, loading all the DLLs and whatnot down below. And here we are. So what are our properties here? Okay, so we got a weird value. So that's why nothing changed. So going back to our test, let's make sure this is correct.
So I dropped out of the call for a minute about. So I'm just guessing you run the test, something didn't add up, and
Yeah.
here we are.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
so we saw that the LF case worked, but CR and CRLF did not.
Okay.
You can see we remained on the default for my system all the time. And the suspicion here is that this property was not parsed correctly. So I'm curious. So we're using a third-party library for parsing editor configs, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And we're very confident in that file. Here is the actual file. So I'm going to go see what that looks like. It is an empty file. That can't be right. Maybe it's already closed the file or
It
something.
probably no. It gets its configuration based on the F# file. That's sort of how editor config works. So you always start in the point of view of a file, and then find the matching editor config files. So you find the closest one, and then the folder above and stuff like that. So there's a file, and there should also be some sort of editor config file around there.
Oh dear.
Ooh, boy.
There's one.
Yeah, and if you...
All right,
Lovely.
so
Yeah.
we wrote out an empty string there. Perfect. Okay, and actually, if you look at that, there's an extra new line, and that is probably a clue. I think we might need to...
Oh, sorry. This is no. We shouldn't be using new line string at all, right? We should just be using to string or whatever.
to config string. Yep.
Yeah, that's the one.
Okay.
I have done that so many times.
Okay. Well, that was an exciting thing for us to go through together as a team. Let's run the test one more time.
I'm not sure what's going to happen, but you might want to have that VS test host debug disabled again.
It when I do it like this, it only applies for the duration of the one command that I run.
That's interesting. Didn't know that.
If you did export that value, then yes, it would be part of my overall environment.
Okay.
All right, we have 3 past tests. That's great.
All right. Ship it.
I feel like we have to do something with this now. I'm going to go ahead and slap this on here before I forget. And now all these warnings should go away eventually. So now that we have this value, and we're pretty confident with it, going to sort of checkpoint. But I'm not going to add it like this. First, I'm going to go... going to ask Fantomas to format my code.
There's also a format change. So now it's going to format everything, but there's also a vague target to format everything you changed in Git. So.
Oh. That would do slightly less work.
Indeed.
So while that's doing that, let's sort of talk about where our next step is. So we have this format configuration that is now aware of our line endings that we would like. What is our entry point for using that? I think in Fantomas, this is the code formatter. Yes, code formatter, specifically these entry points like format document or format AST. And these all create a context to do the formatting and then actually do the formatting. From what I can see, the config is only used in format, so I feel like this is where we should continue our investigation.
These all just eventually pass things along to format, so we'll definitely end up over there. But one thing we already could do is add a sort of an end-to-end test. We also have tests for our command line tool, and I'm not going to say we should solve it purely on that one test, but we could also create something that we're expecting and then dig in deeper and maybe create some more tests in specific areas along the way. But if you look at the Fantomas, I think, core global tool tests project, something.
Yep. That's the tool itself, sorry. Here's the tests.
Indeed. So we have some config tests, and I think these actually, use an editor config. These use the real command line, the compiled command line. They write stuff to disk and then do the formatting and you sort of assert expectations.
Nice. Okay. Okay, and you just use a code sample of arbitrary. Okay.
This sort of cleans up the files you write on disk afterwards. So
Nice. So, a question I have then is, do you know what kind of line endings are inserted by the compiler by default in a literal string like this?
we're sort of going to write this to disk, and I'm guessing the new lines will be... No idea, but I don't think it matters, actually.
I was just thinking because I'd want the initial test to be something that wasn't what was written by default, because I want to get that failure.
Yeah, I guess we could just transform the string ourselves to use a certain set of line breaks, right?
Fair enough, yeah.
Yeah, if you just write it all on one line and just manually insert /n/r, then you can control it perfectly.
That would be an excellent way to go. So, see how this is working correctly, this fellow up here? We're just going to not do that for a moment. So we're going to copy some scaffolding here and then change what we want. So in this case, fine. Do that. So the reason I'm doing it like this is because I anticipate wanting to parameterize this portion of it. So I'm just sort of preemptively planning for that. Okay. And so this is going to be end of line equals some other parameterized thing, but we'll start with CRLF or let's start like this, and we'll start like this because we know this combination will fail currently. So we will run, we are processing, and at the end, we are also going to want to be able to generate some expected result, which should equal sample code plus some new line, which for now is this. All right, so for this...
Fantomas isn't going to try and strip the final line or anything, is it?
No, it's going to add one, actually. So even if you didn't have the new line there, it's going to add one anyways. Yeah.
That's an excellent point.
Always has been. So.
And that would actually... So right now on my environment, that would use /n. So I guess we shouldn't rely on that, though. We should explicitly set up the values that we want, because if we explicitly set up each of the new lines we're inserting and expecting back, then that means these tests will run the same on every platform. So, all right. So if we go to, this is the core global tool tests, then we should be able to see how this works. I really appreciate the effort that has gone into setting up these structures, because I know this part, especially run Fantomas tool, can be a pain from working with Jimmy Bird to test some of his .NET tools. So
yeah, I mean,
just getting everything set up in an isolated directory so that you can work is kind of a pain.
While we're sort of waiting, is going to be the strategy for the next version of the SCF in regards to .NET 5? Is it still going to be a net standard 2 thing? The compiler service?
So FCS is still net standard 2.0. Yep, cool. We got our failure. There are some subtleties there, though. You may have noticed in some of the other PRs that if you use the type checking aspects of FCS, you're now required to use .NET 5, like to actually run your code on .NET 5. You can publish a net standard 2.0 library, but it has to be run on .NET 5. In my opinion, this is a bug, and it has to do with the way that the compiler resolves framework references in certain scenarios. I'm actively working with the team at Microsoft to nail down the root cause for that bug, at which point you shouldn't be forced to run on .NET 5 in order to use the new FCS. But from Fantomas' perspective in particular, because you only operate on the parse trees, this does not impact you.
Okay.
You can continue to use FCS 38 as a net core app 2.1 or 3.1 or whatever application and still publish a net standard 2.0 library.
Yeah.
So in some ways, you were actually the easiest tool that I went through and updated. So we got this failure as we expected, because on my machine, we only have new lines, not carriage returns and new lines. So now we have to actually go implement the code, I think. All right. So when the tool itself runs, if we go look at the global tool, I want to just sort of follow this into what that test was just doing. So if we look at the main, there's a whole bunch of argument parsing, and I'm guessing we were processing a specific file.
Yeah.
And so we were processing from an input file to an output file, but this looks like the key part here. We read the configuration given an input file, we discover the configuration.
I don't think we give an output file, so we could have gone in the other thing as well. But it's going to go in process source file either way, I think.
Yeah. And then it's going to format the file. So we're going to read the config, which we are fairly certain now is pretty fine. And then we are going to get the file's content and format the file's content. And I believe this is our magic right here.
Yep.
All right.
Yep.
So if we go here, we've been here before. We know this place, but the magic is going to be here.
Correct.
Somewhere in here. Which thing calls format? We're just walking the chain, everybody. So this is the AST structures from the compiler. This is where the formatting actually happens.
This is going to be the input. I think the format with part is going to trigger the entire format.
Yes. Yes. So this will walk the AST tree, generating all the different writer events, and then dump will actually emit the writer events.
Yeah, exactly.
And so Florian and I have talked a little bit offline about different implementation strategies for this. And there are sort of two paths that I've seen. And one is there is a particular writer inside this whole tree of generation that happens that writes a new line into the output stream. Or rather, it generates a writer event that will emit a new line. And you could, at that point, emit the new line that the user has chosen instead of emitting some sort of internal standardized new line and transforming it at the end. That's the second option. Keep the new lines as emitted inside this function call consistent and uniform, and then do a one-time transformation at the end to what the user desired. And there's pluses and minuses to both approaches. The second one, I think, is far easier. And it also has the benefit of keeping things internally consistent inside this gen call. when you're in this context, a new line is always going to be /n, which has like cognitive overhead benefits in my opinion. So this was a long way of saying I think the way we should solve this is to, when we actually write the model, instead of joining these lines, well, after we join all the lines, do a final find and replace with the user's chosen new line structure. Does that seem reasonable to you, gentlemen?
So do you mean doing a find and replace for the string /n and replacing it with the chosen token, or find and replace for the entity new line which has no string representation?
I don't believe there is an entity.
Sure. Yeah, I was just wondering whether you intended setting one up somehow.
That is actually not a bad idea either. Florian might want to weigh in on that, because I know there's a context, like there's a writer event concept. We could change this to have a new line concept here.
The right line is actually your sort of your right and new line, I think.
So, I mean, is that the way we should go with this instead? Sort of interpret right line here with that config?
If you're going to look at what right line does further on in the code, it's going to update the internal model with the next line. So you can see do new line, and then it's just going to add whatever was in the buffer, so to speak, to the lines in the writer model itself.
Mm-hmm.
So I think all of that is still pretty okay, and you'll end up with just a list of strings. These are the individual lines, and then in the dump method, we just concatenate them currently with system environment new line, and I think we could just
change that.
Just change that. That's going to be like the easiest.
Perfect. All right,
sure.
So that's super straightforward, because this context already has our config on it.
It was called what, end of line or something?
Yeah. And that should do the thing.
Okay, Patrick, is the screen still fluid for you? I'm sort of having freezes every once in a while.
It just froze up for me as well.
Okay, I'm at the let you start point.
Oh yeah.
There we are. Okay, good.
Oh, okay, sorry. It was probably a hiccup on my side when there was some type checking going on.
Oh, I also have unreliable network at the time, so it just could have been totally me.
All right, so let's see what this test has to say. And if this one particular test turns green, then I think the next step should be to parameterize this test to exercise all of the different new line options that we have.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea.
That's all the work for this, right? Isn't it? Like it was just that, basically a config change, a one-line change to the dump. There's also dump and continue actually, which we haven't changed.
Excellent point.
But
I think that is all the work. I don't see any other work that needs to be done for this.
There could be something in token parser. I'll get to that in a bit. But yeah, dump and continue is purely a debug thing. So that's where I just put a breakpoint on one of those lines and see what the hell is going on. But other than that,
so we didn't actually work. Our test did not actually pass. So we have to ask ourselves, what happened? Oh, you know what? We made the same mistake. Wait, is that right? Did we? This is the config test. What were the other tests we were in? this test. Yeah, we didn't have to quote it down here. So that's not the problem. I guess it might be time to debug again. Although this test, I think, is going to be slightly harder to debug because it's invoking the tool.
Yeah.
Hold on. The config fixture is unused. Is that intended?
I don't think you use the fixture. It could be intended to just writes out the file and cleans it up in the dispose. So
Okay, fine.
could just use like an underscore prefix, but other than that, I was actually expecting this to work. So
Yeah. Did the Fantomas tool get rebuilt?
I know.
Yep, it did.
I know what it is. It's it's another one of those things. If you go back to code format or implementation, so the context dump will probably not contain that last new line as an event, as the AST doesn't really dictate it. But the moment you call dump, so I think back in code format or implementation.
Mm-hmm.
So you have that formatted code, and it will, maybe the caller will format with. At a certain point, we just force a new line at the end of everything, even after that.
So let's see what gets used.
So I think even after format, so who's calling format in our case?
So add new line if needed.
Yes.
That's just below.
Yes, somewhere around.
Yeah, line 405. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so after we call format, then it does this. Fair enough. So this would need to learn about the content, or the config at minimum.
Yeah, indeed.
Would you rather pass the minimal information, like the new line style directly, or would you rather pass the whole context around?
Well, go maybe just for the config. You'll probably have that, so.
It's more type safety if you pass in the config.
Sorry, I guess what I meant by that was you can pass in this, which has the property, or you could pass in this, provided from the caller. You know, it's like a sort of question of intent, or question of, I guess, scope of the function.
I don't have the strongest opinion. You go for it.
I think I want to do this because
sure.
this is slightly easier to test.
Yeah, that was the only consideration I had in mind as well.
If it was, I mean, it's a very simple method, and it's sort of a post hoc rationalization. But this is a lot easier to stress than having to generate an entire F# config.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess
Okay.
this means that our test case is also not sufficiently complete then.
No, it doesn't indeed cover everything. If we have new lines between like let bindings, it could still not have been done, so to speak. So we're not testing the dump method itself.
All right. So are those all the usages?
Hello,
Hello.
Hello.
I'm Jimmy. I just want to ask a question about line 407. Do you think we need to check just the user's specified new line or any given new line? Because would you want to replace it if there was something else differently there?
At this point, I think we're only going to have user-facing new lines, right? Because we've done the format and the join of the user.
Yeah, it will be the setting indeed. You already did the dump part, so.
Cool.
So let me point that out real quick. So this dump here does the sort of normalization of the user-facing new lines.
Cool.
For all of sort of the internal new lines.
I guess strictly speaking, the thing that you just highlighted doesn't do that, right? Because it's the concat. We could be concatenating a line that ends with a new line character. But yeah, I believe your reasoning is just that isn't a complete explanation.
All right, so I believe those are all the use cases of add new line if needed. These two sort of formatting entry points. So do you two think that now our test case should work? It's just not a representative enough test case?
Yep.
Okay. So let's see if we can verify that the test works, and then we can look at making better tests. So perhaps a better test would have multiple bindings with new lines interspersed in between.
Yep. Possibly
Okay.
even different kinds of new line character. I don't know.
All right, we're going to get very silly here then. So if we do this, and then we do what are we missing? We're just missing that. So that would have all three new line styles in it, with a trailing new line. And so then our expected code would be this, but replace every permutation of new line character with whatever the destination or whatever the expected new line character was. So if we go like that, I think we might actually have to order them in a specific order so that, like, this is the greediest one, if that makes sense. And I believe that's a string array. And for now, we'll say this because this is the test that we're running. This makes me wonder.
Yeah, this might be what I was imagining earlier. Is that the trailing carriage return isn't a new line and hasn't been parsed as a new line. It's just a straight character, and so it's appeared on the end of the input.
Also, I'm apparently completely misremembering the replace functions. There's no replace any one of these with this other, so we might have to do like a series of replaces. All right, well, we'll leave this incorrect for now and try and solve the root issue that you've identified, Patrick.
I don't think that really is an issue. Like carriage return isn't a new line. I don't think it's correct for /r to be replaced by /r/n.
Mm. That's
Oh,
so
okay,
why would it be a
fine.
viable option here?
In that case, maybe it is, but I'm not
I mean,
sure I've ever heard of it like that.
Well, even the docs for system environment new line sort of call that out. If we look at these here, it only gives you one of two options.
I'm also wondering what the F-sharp specification says on that.
Yeah, system environment new line is definitely only one or two.
Yeah. So it's bizarre. So, well, first off, our expectations are completely incorrect. So let's fix that so we can see what the deltas actually are. So we should be replacing RN with, well, RN in this case. And we should be replacing, I realize that's a no-op. I'm just sort of being pedantic.
Yeah, according to the F-sharp spec, a new line is either /n or /r/n.
Yeah, I was thinking that.
All right, so I guess what I'm trying to line up here is that our expected result should have any permutation of input source new line for the whatever those values might be, replaced with whatever our user configured new line string is. And should there be, and in this case, there should be a trailing one. So like this.
Yeah,
this
so
should be
the trailing /r, according to F#, is not a new line. That's just a user-entered character. And so it shouldn't be replaced. So this is a mismatch between what editor config allows and what F# allows.
Okay. So like that entirely then.
Yeah, I think so.
Now I do think as written, there should be an additional new line at the end here, like an additional new line as a concept at the end here. So this, I think, will fail currently because I did not also add
exactly.
this. But maybe we got in before the test built. We'll see.
I think you might still get like a double replacement. Yep. That's what I was going to say. I think you're going to double replace /n with /rn/n. So,
Oh yeah, there.
So you're going to end up with double new lines. So you kind of have to look at like you only want to replace it if it isn't already itself or something.
Ugh. I mean, I guess this is why people don't do this normally.
Just shove it through string.split and string.concat. That's surely going to do the right thing.
Yeah. And this actually will let me do what I wanted to do originally.
Oh, so remember there's that bug with this particular call? I don't know if you remember this one, Chet.
Can you remind me?
So if you put in an array here, it will strip out the white space of stuff. So if you're reliant on white space for anything, this will potentially hurt. You have to do split at the single character level, which is, yes, annoying. I had to do it in the packet lock diff tool thing that I wrote recently.
This sample code that we have above, do you see that triggering on it?
I don't think it'll happen, but since this is a formatting tool and spaces tend to be a thing, it might be reliant on. It probably won't be a problem for this particular case. But just as more of a heads up.
Okay, and then we'll just concat together with, if I could type, the user specified. So what is it not happy about now?
I think it needs to be an array.
Oh, because it's an array, yeah.
It will be string.concat.
Yeah, we got there.
And I think split takes an array, so list as well.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, I thought I provided an array here.
I can't read your ligatures, I'm afraid.
Oh, I think, yeah, sorry. This is an F# overload thing. When you use the array, when you use the array form, there's no non-optional split options, which is a fun phrase to say. So you have to specify the split options there. All right, one last time.
I guess the right answer then is if the user tells us to, in their editor config, to use /r, is to throw, because you're not going to get valid F# code out of it.
Yeah, I think so.
I think that might be a problem, depending on what scope we get we'll take a look at that in a second. Depending on what scope we get the directive at. So if it is scoped to only F# code, then yes, that's a legitimate response. But if they set it at a global level,
it's gonna take over at a global level. So you'll need to specify something else for the F# file, I guess.
Okay, so your contention is if we ever see just /r, which I guess is carriage return, right? If we ever see that option, then we should throw and force the user to change that setting specifically for F# files.
Yeah, I'm tempted to do it like that.
That makes sense.
I'm going to have to head back to work, I'm afraid.
Yes, sorry, we already we hit the hour mark. Time flies.
We did.
Yeah.
Well, in any case, many thanks for being here, Patrick. It was
Yeah,
nice
thanks.
having you.
No, this was another interesting one to look at. I've having a look at the different areas has been really useful. Like this is the config bit, which I'd never really seen before. So yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, cheers.
It was good to meet you.
It's good luck fixing the rest of it.
Thanks.
All right, so nice descriptive error message there.
So what?
Well, actually, we're never going to hit that on that point. I think here is actually where we need to make that change, right?
Yeah, indeed. But so sorry for sidetracking, but our unit test still doesn't totally work, correct?
Correct. I'm actually going to go. This test needs to be updated because it fails now.
That could be like a different test to expect that we throw there.
Yeah.
Maybe go for a valid end of line setting or something.
Yeah. To do this fails on CR. Okay, so I've got a note of that. We'll come back to it. Now we can try and make this guy work. So what did we end up with? We ended up still with mixed. Yeah. It looks like the only thing we stripped was a carriage return. Is that correct? No, we lost 2 spaces somewhere. Oh yeah, 2 spaces because it's a slash and an R. So where did that happen? Is there a set of tests that actually invoke the code instead of invoking the Fantomas tool so that we could get a sense of what was happening?
Yes, I'm still a bit puzzled. Why we're getting that? So do you think our dump method changed?
That is what I was looking for. So that should be that. We've got dump and continue done here. Does finalize writer model do anything?
Does a lot of magic. But nothing.
Oh, it looks like if there's any sort of ambient state, it creates an event to write that ambient state. So not magic in the sense of, oh, I'm going to write 15 new line characters in here anywhere.
The whole way the writer model works is, can I say it's magic, but it's It's nice. It's nice. I don't know it by heart. I didn't write it. I never had to touch it, so it just really works very well. He wrote this, and it just works. And I know it at a conceptual level that it takes events and just makes lines of it, and then we dub them. So that was always good enough for me.
So I know on the.
So I think any test file would do if we trigger the configuration.
Oh yeah, of course. A nice, simple.
There are some form. Just take some file and copy some test and just figure out where the test should maybe be afterwards. But
All right, so our config is going to be format config
there's
default.
actually already a config value available, so we can just take config with and then do it like that.
All right, we got that. Where did I get this from? I got this from Active Pattern Tests, FS Unit. That's what it is.
Maybe question for you, Chet. How are you on time? I'm guessing it's early in the morning, so is it?
I should probably cut this short relatively soon. I have to get some actual work done today, I think.
Yeah, so I don't want to take everything of your day. Maybe let's just try and solve it quick and dirty. So we have like a little catharsis moment, and then we can continue to work on the draft, on the pull request or something as a draft.
I completely agree. I keep wanting to make an alias for this, like attach or something that just takes all of the rest of your line and just prepends this environment variable to it, just for my own personal usage. Because unless I've been using it recently, it's always like, is it VS Host test debug or VS test host debug? Or the other thing I don't like is if I click this play button before the process ID is visible over here, the drop down doesn't repopulate. That's like a VS Code thing. It's just mildly annoying.
It also took me a while to realize that you need to press continue before your debugging thing actually starts.
Yeah. So I hit play before this was ready, and you can see it doesn't exist.
Okay.
Super fun. There we go. There is an extension that discovers any .NET Test compatible test and provides a quick debug thing, which does this handshake for you. But it doesn't support F#, and I've talked with them a few times, and it's a process. We'll say that.
Lovely.
Okay, so where would it? I guess we can just plop a breakpoint here and confirm a few things before we start the. Oh, that test.
You're in the.
Oh, yeah. I'm in the wrong directory. Heavens no. What did I get? Test helpers. This line was expected to have type string. I do not know what this is complaining about here.
Could you go back to the test menu?
Yeah. I mean, this isn't even a test failure. It's a compilation failure.
Yeah. Sometimes you have to like mess around with where the word config is. Well, in this case, I would expect that this would work.
Hmm. So format with has that. That all still looks fine. Oh, add new line if needed takes the. Yep, that makes perfect sense. Yep.
I think the add new line if needed is something we could actually refactor in the code printer. Before we dump everything, we just check the last event, and if it's not a new line, just add another event to it. Something for another time, but
Well, add new line if needed is only used in a few spaces. Type mismatch expecting a string blah. Oh, this has to do with parameter order. Yeah. Yeah, so if format and format with learned about that, then you're right. You wouldn't need add new line if needed because all code paths that call add new line with needed call format or format with directly below.
yeah, indeed, it's just a matter of ending with the right events.
Okay, we're attached. And let's see, where should we hook into? Where am I missing that dump call? Like, where is that happening? Is that in format
Yeah.
with? Yes, there it is. There we go. I got there. Oh, that's a breakpoint from my work in the other branch. Okay, so here we are. We're beginning to do that formatting. I wanted to verify that we had the end of line detected correctly. So in this case, we should because I'm setting it directly on the record. But I just wanted to make sure. I guess the next thing to do would be just to see what the writer model looks like at the end. Again, more breakpoints from some work I was doing yesterday. Okay, so here we are And if we look at the writer model, should just see a few lines here. In fact, we just see one line, which is fine because our code is just one line. So it's going to reverse them and concat them. So this is a problem in the first place, because concatenation doesn't mean anything if there's only one line. But I guess it's also not meaningful then.
It's not really a problem, I guess.
We crashed the process.
Yeah, that tends to happen.
I accidentally called a toString on the context and it didn't like that. So let's see. What if we put it here instead? I did it again. All right, we're just going to skip that line entirely and see what the formatted source code that comes out of this process is.
Yeah, because
The .NET Core debugger is so finicky sometimes, or at least the version of it that we get access to here. All right, so our formatted source code is just the one line. Remove trailing spaces. Aha. Well, so this could be a problem. I don't think so. Yeah.
this also makes me wonder if this is something we should optimize as well. This feels like something that should happen in dump, right?
Removing trailing spaces.
Yeah. So here we're splitting the whole thing again after we merged it. So that's
Yeah.
it's a bit of
I mean, this is also the only place that this function is called. So, what is it doing? So it's splitting on the environment's new line. It's trimming trailing white space. So this feels like maybe white space should be trimmed from the wow.
from the dump from the writable lines, I think.
Yeah. So also on this, so it's also on the very first line trimming a starting new line if it exists. So it seems like in dump, when we iterate through the writer events, if it's the first event and the first character is a new line, it should be trimmed. And then each time you write a line, the content that you're about to write should be trimmed. Or trimmed at the end, I mean. Does that make sense?
I think it does, but the question is, I don't know by heart why we do this trim start part. So maybe that's it could be like a sort of a legacy thing there. So
Sure. So what if we don't have that?
yeah, it's not going to be a problem in the unit test case.
That would explain some things too, because what we noticed in a couple places was only the the new line, I think, character getting purged. Okay, so our formatted source code, as we saw before, looks fine. Oh my goodness, crash it again. What are you doing? Well, so in this case, there's only the one line, so we're going to make a single element list. We're going to return that single element and then return it out. And then afterwards, the new line will be added if needed. So let's just run the test without debugging and see what's up. Sometimes I find it can also help to run the release configuration of the test as well, even if you're going to be debugging them. Because, I think there's a lot of tail calls and mutual recursion that happens in this code base. And in release mode, those things are handled slightly better. Hey, look. It worked.
Did it though?
So what?
Could you go back to the test? I'm just wondering one thing.
Yes, of course.
Because when you're going to run this on the CI/CD, the whole thing, new lines, I think like the format source string will go for /n. So I think the actual asserts probably doesn't prove the point. The test just passed, I guess.
Here's the thing to test. So on the tool tests, I think it was here we had our I think this might work better now, maybe, with the removal of that, with the commenting out of that one line that we did.
Yeah,
and this is a more representative test.
It will prove the point more accurately.
You can see I've been doing this for a bit on different test cases.
Did you plan to attach to it, or?
I did not.
I'm just mentioning it because we're going to run the process itself and not be able to debug into that same places.
Florian, I'm going insane. all I see are /r's and /rn's and all these things. I don't even see text anymore. All right, so this is the exact same failure as we had before. So we have not solved the problem, unfortunately.
Could you change the sample code and not have any new lines in between, just to sort of prove the point there?
You mean like just
to let a equals 9 as the sample code?
And see if we end.
Yeah, we need to see if the ending is what we expect there.
I think my expected is incorrect too, because I'm not appending a trailing new line.
That's true.
It's a bit too late for this test, but it looks like that one passed. It should probably fail now that I've changed the expectation. So we're not appending the trailing new line for some reason. So in this test, there was a trailing new line, I think. Right? Like that's what that is. And we ended up with a trailing new line. So if I do even just something as simple as that, does the new line appear? And if it is, what does that say about the way we're currently handling trailing new lines?
That your expected is going to be wrong, right? Because you're still adding the extra new line there. Would it not be a double new line?
Yeah. Well, in this case, I also needed to add the indentation there. So it looks like having a new line, so the new line that is at this position was transformed.
So that
But there was no new line inserted at this position. But that's actually fine because Fantomas would see this white space and remove it. And then it would see two new lines. Like Fantomas, after stripping white space, would see something like this instead, and then reduce it to 1. Is that correct?
Sorry, come again.
So I guess what we are saying is expected right now is something like this. That's not any reasonable thing that we should expect Fantomas to return. I think this is a reasonable expectation for this input code. And if we give Fantomas input like this, we should get... Let's just get a whole bunch of this out of the way. Can we transform well, no, we said /r wasn't legitimate. Can we transform a new line into a carriage return new line? Yes.
All right. So that's something.
Yeah.
The question here is it the new line that was created as a trivia that's being processed correctly now because of the dump? And if we don't have it, something else goes wrong. So it's still a bit pinpointing, is the context part okay, or is the thing after the context part still missing something?
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm happy with this. This is already a lot of progress.
I guess what I expect to happen now is a whole bunch of other tests to fail.
Yeah, most likely. It's that's That's the joy of it.
Um,
But yeah, I would maybe it's a good moment to sort of start wrapping up as we're already quite
yeah.
quite into it. I mean, I sort of feel like we're not going to be able to solve it in the next 5 minutes, so maybe we should consider this a good start.
I agree. I'm going to run a quick formatting pass and then make a commit and then push up the current state.
Yeah, I would just suggest that you create a draft pull request, and I can sort of continue and fiddle some more with this. So it's interesting stuff.
I agree. It's when we were talking earlier, I thought this was going to be a lot more straightforward than it is. But it's always interesting when you start looking at a domain and you find like those little hidden complexities that you weren't quite prepared for.
Yeah, and it's also interesting to sort of expose things that are maybe not that good in the code. We had that last session as well. I'm mostly focused on what happens in Code Printer. How does the creation of the events, what's that doing? But then there's just another set of areas which, could use some love, I guess. And one of them is, hey, why are we still splitting the string and doing all these operations at the end?
Well, and that I think is going to be an interesting question to solve, and will actually have performance ramifications in terms of allocations for sure.
Yeah, definitely. That was also my thinking that this should be gold for the benchmark. So.
Okay, that has been pushed up, and I'll create a draft pull request, and we can continue collaborating on it there.
Yes, somebody's been asking questions. Sorry for that.
Yeah, Brandon.
Good time. Sorry, Brandon. My bad.
No, it's completely okay. I was not wanting to interrupt, mid train of thought for you guys, and my thing was not that important, and I found out it looks just fine. So,
were you looking at that trim?
The remove trailing spaces.
Yeah. So that is an interesting thing to look into.
Yeah,
sure.
I'm digging into it now on another screen.
Nice. Oh dear, I've already lost there it is, 1231. I'll fill in details when people aren't watching me type.
Super.
All right,
cool. This was fun, and very unexpected actually. So.
I'm going to stop screen sharing. Actually, this is an interesting question for me. If I bring the Teams view on my desktop, can you see that?
Yes, I can see myself right now, and it's okay. It just became obvious that the sun went down here. So.
Well, I guess that, like, I agree with you. That was a great time. It was good to work with Patrick and you to try and knock this out. And I'm happy with the progress we made, even if we didn't get all the way there.
Yeah, but it's good. It's incentive. It's it's pushing the project forward. So many thanks, Chet, for being here, for doing this, and it was a lot of fun to watch as you're just you're a seasoned developer. The way you move into command line, stuff like that. It's wonderful to watch. It's really appreciated.
Well, thank you for having me.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining the show, and see you next time. Goodbye. Cheers.